Good evening. I'm Marion Dry, Chair of ClassACT HR73, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this first ever ClassACT webinar. It's called a 10-point plan for building a board of directors in the nonprofit world. I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ron Dieckmann, Harvard-Radcliffe Class of 73, ClassACT Board Member, and he is the founder and executive director of KidsCareEverywhere. He was educated at Harvard, Stanford Medical School, and the Berkeley School of Public Health. He is a professor emeritus of pediatrics and medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and was the director of pediatric emergency medicine at San Francisco General Hospital for 25 years. Triple board certified in pediatrics, pediatric emergency medicine, and general emergency medicine. Ron has edited 5 first edition medical textbooks, is a frequent speaker at national and international medical conferences, and has received national awards for service to American medical education and training. In 2003, he co-founded PEMSoft, the Pediatric Emergency Medicine Software, a decision support software knowledge system, which is now owned by EBSCO Publishing in Ipswich, Massachusetts. His international family travels led him to found KidsCareEverywhere and to donate medical software to impoverished health systems in the low-income world. Ron has built his organization with the invaluable assistance of a strong board. Ron will share his experience and state why it is crucial to be proactive in developing a strong, involved board of directors. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you so much, Marion. I wish my mother could have heard that. Good evening, everyone. I am broadcasting to you from Northern California. And in the next 20 minutes, I am going to take you through Chapter 1 in our ClassACT boot camp on how to create an effective nonprofit organization. I hope to be able to share with you some of our challenges, some of our mistakes, and hopefully some of our successes as well, and leave you at the end with 10 points that I think might be critical for you as you approach building and rebuilding a nonprofit board. I only wish that someone would have told me these things before I started doing this 17 years ago. What does a board do? We all know that a board is all about governance, and that is indeed its legal obligation. It is the oversight body for the entire organization, but it is also the decision epicenter for all the mission, strategy, goals of the organization. It really must garner your most serious attention to actually create boards, because they will, in fact, determine the quality of what you're doing, and very importantly, the quality of your life as a founder or a member of the organization. There's a lot of good a lot of good information out there. I have taken information from all of these sources, and I am not going to repeat most of this formulaic information about how to create a board. I want to do something a little bit different here tonight. I do, however, want to call out the fact that there are a lot of really great organizations out there helping people wanting to work in the nonprofit world. And the one that we use is the one at the very end of this column here, the Center for Excellence in Nonprofits. It's a fantastic organization. They give away everything for free. They hold webinars. You can't sign up for actual classes with this particular center, but it is totally fantastic. And as I mentioned, has a newsletter that anybody can subscribe to. So how do we begin? It's, of course, essential that we have at the start a fantastic idea. Everybody is drawn to ideas that are potentially transformational. Making a difference is a contagious concept. And this is why at the start of building a board, it's actually much easier. I am going to delve with you into some of the more difficult stuff about how to sustain a board over a long period of time. So talk to your friends about your idea, but don't put them all on the board. That's a rookie error, and it's an error that I made. And it took me years to unwind to get to something way more expansive that reflected a much broader set of opinions about how to create our programs, how to evaluate them, and how to sustain them. So you must seek diversity on the board and get people who don't look like you, don't think like you, and don't possess your skill set. And all of these areas of diversity add something to what you're doing. And I can say that for sure, one of the ones that I am especially interested in is age diversity for this group of colleagues, all of you. We're all getting pretty old, folks, and we need to have younger people on our boards to represent different points of view. Obviously, gender diversity, cultural, racial diversity, diversity in points of view are something that you have to have in your expansive view of what this board should look like. But really importantly, and this is something that I have certainly become very exquisitely aware of as I have gone through my 17 years of board development with Kids Care Everywhere, is you have to have a skill set diversity as well. And when you start out, it's really easy to select a lot of people that share with you your profession or your passion. But as the days go on, you realize that you also need a lot of other help. And I cannot tell you how important it is for me to have had the skill set diversity in our board, with our accountant, with our business people, with our legal people, our educators. All these people contribute something really unique that I can't contribute as a physician, and most of our original board members who are physicians could not contribute. So what is a predictor of a great board member? It's not wealth or connections. Although let me tell you for sure, if you are wealthy and have good connections, or if you know an angel investor, that is a fantastic advantage. But that is really not what makes a great board member. What makes a great board member is the guy with his or her fire in the belly, a person with a passion for whatever your values, your mission, your vision is. Those are the people that are going to make your organization thrive. At the beginning, you have to tell them about the money. And this is something that's sometimes difficult for people working in the nonprofit sector. It was difficult for me. But money is very much a part of how we survive as a nonprofit organization. So whether or not you like it or you don't like dealing with money, you have to deal with money. And with any prospective board member, you have to be clear at the beginning before you sign them on to being on your board, the give-get responsibility for fundraising. That is, you set an amount, could be 1,000, 5,000, whatever the amount is that you agree is the correct amount for your organization, and they have to get that amount of money at the minimum every year. And your board has to understand the business plan because, again, like it or not, we're in the business world when we're in the nonprofit world. It's really essential that you set term limits to the time that your various members will have on the board. And these have to be variable. You don't want to have everybody expire with their terms at the same time, and they can be renewable. But variable term limits really gives a freshness and flexibility to the board. And on the other side of it, often there is a reason that you don't want the person to be continuing on the board. And the presence of term limits allows you easily, with a face-saving way, to get the person off the board and a fresh face on the board. You have to be thinking about recruitment, because if you adopt the concept of term limits, it means you're going to have to be recruiting people all the time. So this is an aspect of the job of the founder and the primary board members, which is to have a recruitment pathway and a recruitment strategy. For us in Kids Care Everywhere, about 10 years ago, for example, I set up a global fellowship for younger college graduates to help us in our projects around the world. And in one case, my friend Trevor spent 6 months in Vietnam doing some great work for us, but then went on to medical school, went on to residency, is out practicing medicine, and he is our most recent board member. That is a pathway for recruitment. You have to have recruitment on your mind all the time when you have a term limit structure for your board. So when you're at that holiday party in a few weeks and you're having a fantastic conversation with a very inspirational personality, be thinking to yourself, can we get this guy or this woman to be on our board? Recruitment has to be always on your mind. It's easy to start small. You don't have to start big. The law only requires that you have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. That's it. So you can start with 4 people, 3 people. The optimal size, I think, in most people's estimation, in my view, is probably about 8. But you can do this incrementally, and you can build and grow together. Now, how about if you don't have people within the inner circle who are potential board members? What are you going to do if you don't have that accountant, you don't have that businessman, you don't have that doctor or educator? Well, for us, the biggest reservoir of really good board members has been from our donor community. We have a very large donor community that is interested in the world of global health. And the majority of the board members that I have selected and the board has approved over the years have come from our donor community. Professional associations, professional networks, all of them are potential sources of board members if you're really looking for somebody that you don't have close by. The only issue about that is when you go outside your inner circle, it's really essential that you do due diligence on who those people are and how they behave in a team situation. The next item I want to stress with you is the definition of what I call the holy trio in the early stages of developing your board. That is, you have to sit down with your board members and talk about what your values are, who you are, who you want to be, what your vision is for where you want to go, and specifically, what is your mission for how you're going to accomplish this. Now, I'm just going to show you an example of our core values. This comes off our website, and you must have an effective website as an interface with your outside community when you engage in development of a board and of a nonprofit. So this is on the landing page of our website, our core values. This was one of the most interesting processes that we've ever done as part of our board and Kids Care Everywhere. It took us months to do this, and it was so enjoyable, and it was so moving, it was so poignant as people expressed what they wanted to have represented in our organization. And whenever there are issues that come up now, and ever since we created these values, it's easy to go back and do problem solving and resolve issues and dilemmas based on what you have declared to be your core values. It's a fantastic bonding experience for a board to sit down and create these values. And then you have to create your vision and your mission, and you need to state what those are in explicit terms. And this is again from our own website about what our vision is where a world where all doctors have access to current medical information, not just rich doctors or doctors from the Western world. And our mission is that we are trying to save children's lives by empowering doctors with state-of-the-art software. We give away one of the finest softwares in the world to use on mobile phones. The software is about 70,000 pages in length and really encompasses all of modern medicine. It's really essential that you codify your processes. The law requires only a couple things that you codify. Only your articles of incorporation, which is literally one single page of who you are and what your address is, and bylaws, and minutes. That's all the law requires, but that is not even close to enough of what you need as an organization to be able to make your practices reproducible and analyzable so that you can look back later and say, are we doing what we said we did? And to be able to evaluate them properly. So we have, and I strongly encourage the use of many easily modifiable electronic documents. These documents all have a life of their own. We have provider manuals in our organization, instructor manual, operations manual. Operations manual are being changed every month, depending on what the circumstances are. But these gives your board, your donors potentially, and your actual recipients of whatever your services or products are, the opportunity to actually work in a standardized environment so that we don't have to make these things up every single time we go. We have gone to almost 100 different places in the low-income world, and it allows me to actually monitor what our teams are doing with all of these different codifiable processes and having a high sense of confidence that they're doing what we've agreed to do, and that we can later look back and say, did we do it? It's really essential for every nonprofit to have ways to archive information. And I can tell you that QR codes and Google Docs, which are free, are some of the best ways to store, organize, and share your data so you can get to it and so your board can get to it and get to it easily. Another innovation that we brought up about 10 years ago was the onboarding package. So an onboarding package is something that you create for new board members. So there is not any mistake about what it is that they signed on to do. And it establishes expectations. So when we go back to look at whether we did it or we didn't, we can look at this particular document. So this is the onboarding package that we give in Kids Care Everywhere to any new board members. It's intended as a guide, but it lays down expectations of what we want them to do. And it also customizes some individual projects for them that we want them to start out doing so that they come on board with us on day one with a clear notion of what it is that we want them to do and how specifically they are going to add to our skill set. Promoting professional development is something that you must entertain from the very beginning of your board development. You have to create an atmosphere of lifelong learning for your board members. One of the best ways is to have your annual retreat. The annual retreat is always fun. And these board members that are giving their usually volunteer time to you are people that are precious parts of your organization. So taking good care of them, having fun at the retreat, and sending them to conferences to be able to hone their knowledge in whatever the practice area is that you're working in are really key. We have had so much enthusiasm about networking through conferences. For example, 10 years ago, we went to a conference and had a great interaction with the health minister from Ethiopia, Dr. Tedros. And Dr. Tedros heard what we did and invited us to come. And one of our most interesting projects we've ever done had occurred in the country of Ethiopia over a number of years. Dr. Tedros is now the president of the World Health Organization. 5 years ago, we went to a conference and we're networking with all the different organizations and ran into Patty Garcia, who was the health minister for Peru. And we talked to Patty about what we did. She invited us down to Peru. We went to Lima, and Patty has worked with us for the last 5 years, opening doors everywhere in Lima to help facilitate the training that we do. And on a constant level, you need to provide targeted information to your board members to keep them up to date on what is going on in the area of your endeavor. Adversity is part of the world that I function in every day. The big world is an increasingly treacherous place. 3 years ago, we were going with Dan Scapita's group in Haiti to do some training in Haiti when the president was assassinated and the entire country descended into chaos. 2 years ago, we were in West Africa, in Ghana, and the pandemic descended in sub-Saharan Africa while we were there. And we had to get out of the country in a hurry, and 10 of us going different places in the country. It was really very difficult, very challenging. Last year, we were in Peru, and the president was imprisoned by the Congress, and the entire country was in an uproar. They closed down the airports, they occupied the runways, and over 100 people were killed. 2 weeks ago, we were supposed to be in Bangladesh on a project that we had been working on for 6 months. That we had our bags packed. We got the call. Do not even think about coming to Dhaka in Bangladesh. The entire country was in chaos. The president had imprisoned the opposition candidate, and we couldn't even get out of the airport. These unpredictable events are part of what is the world that we function in. But there's always some silver lining in every one of these events where you can turn what is ostensibly bad to something that is potentially good. In every one of these settings where we face disasters, and there's been so many of them, every one of our missions has some unpredictable thing happen to it. But somewhere you can use your imagination to figure out how to make something much better. And certainly in our experience in Bangladesh, we are going to go back there in 6 months, and we are going to have a way stronger program as a result of all the additional time we have to prepare people. But I must tell you that of all the things that have happened to us in 17 years, none of the natural or political disasters that we have encountered have been nearly as destructive to our processes as internal disruptions. We had on one occasion a very unpleasant sexual harassment event that occurred when I was in the Andes Mountains, 1,000 miles away from Lima. And we were trying to train 300 doctors in the rural areas there. It was a very difficult situation at the moment, and it took me at least a year to unravel all the ramifications of that event. So that was an error of not sufficiently vetting a board member before allowing them to go on a trip. So for all of you, when you are selecting your board members, you first of all have to be sure there's no conflict of interest, and that should be set out in your bylaws, and you have to do the due diligence about character and team behavior. When you select a board, you got to give them something to do. You can't select them and let them rest on the laurels of being in a noble endeavor that is your nonprofit organization. And we have to, in the end, get buy-in by giving them assignments on committees, ad hoc permanent committees. We have ambassadors to different geographical areas, and you have to create opportunities for people to get engaged in the business of the organization and not just be a person in name only in your nonprofit group. Everybody needs to be engaged in fundraising, and this is a subject of a chapter later in our boot camp for creating nonprofits. And for us, the most significant part of getting board members to contribute, to be part of it, to have the passion that they have about forwarding our cause, is to get them actually on the ground doing something with us hands-on. And that is usually going with our teams to remote areas in the nonprofit world. That is by far the best way of engaging your board and keeping them busy and occupied. And lastly, somewhere in the early stages of board development, you have to implement evaluation mechanisms. They do not have to be extensive, and they have to be titrated to the resources of your group, the complexity of what you're doing, and to the style of the board. I do not think that in the nonprofit world there is any greater spectrum of variability in how boards behave is in the world of evaluation. Some people love evaluation and some people hate evaluation. But at the very least, at the fundamental level, you have to do what is simple and straightforward. And you have to do it with the benefit of technology. Google Forms makes doing surveys incredibly easy. All you do is just write out a list of questions for Google, and it does everything else. It sends out the surveys, it crunches the data, and gives you presentation information to show to your board. Our board loves looking at the surveys that we do and the evaluation processes that we do. But when you create evaluation process is to look at whether you are attaining the goals that you had set out to achieve and whether you are performing at the level that you want. You have to use the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. And as long as you are observing the crisp, you have some opportunity of making it reasonably successful. There you can use success metrics that are more quantitative, or you can use qualitative methods using the survey tools. But if you're using survey tools as part of your evaluation, and I encourage you to do that as long as they are simple and short, because if you do it otherwise, nobody is going to respond. And in order to get the best response, it's really great to have a little bit of a carrot to offer in return. And for us, what we do when we evaluate many things. We evaluate the suitability of a site for doing our projects. We evaluate other public efforts to try to promote our operations. The key thing is the KISS principle. And as long as a board is game for at least some amount of discussion, some of these discussions about how you're doing and the feedback to what you're doing become absolutely essential to your organization. So let me stop there. I think I am out of time, and I can open it up to questions.
Ronald, thank you very much. It was a lot of help, and nice seeing you again, everybody from the class. You can't cover everything in a presentation like this, but there were a few things that I think were important that I would appreciate it if you could touch on. One is leadership succession. How is it that you are able to bring new blood in and without upsetting the folks that are currently in power? And what do you do with the people that are currently in power to keep them engaged but not in control? And even more importantly, an issue that to me is of tremendous importance, how do you deal with the executive director? How do you select the executive director? Do you allow the executive director to call the shots and you basically are in a supportive position to that? Or does the board call the shots and the executive director executes what the board does? Thanks.
Yes, these are all very important and complex questions that really could occupy for sure the next couple hours of time. I think there is a lot of variability in terms of how the leadership is structured in different nonprofit organizations. For us, I have been the leader of this organization for 17 years, but it is because of the unique skill set that I have. I was a software developer, owned a software company, and had very close relationships to the software world at the time that we began the organization, and no one else has ever been able to assume those kinds of responsibilities because so much of what we do has to do with software. But I think that this is something that easily can be built in along with term limits at the onset of your organization as to how long the group believes that any given leader should be in place. And I think it's quite sensible that when you're talking about term limits, you're also talking about leadership changes that can be built into the future. And I think I would at least the discussion has to take place about whether or not, any single individual really has the longevity to be able to carry on this function over the long term and whether it should be much better. And I'll tell you, frankly, if somebody else had the technical skill set that I possess to actually run Kids Care Everywhere, I would absolutely support changing leadership every 5 years or so to make that happen. Now, you also asked the question about basically, how do you, in essence, assess the quality of the leadership that you're getting? And this goes back to the last point that I tried to make in the presentation, which is you got to have some kind of evaluation of performance, at the very least, of the board members themselves, of the executive director, and of where you're going and whether you're attaining your goals. Those, in my view, are very basic and fundamental to the overall operations of the organization. And so without that, I don't know how people really know, how well they're doing and whether they're really accomplishing, what they set out to do.
Thank you. Mark Donovan, would you unmute yourself and ask your question and lower your hand.
Ron, I'm wondering how you think about the timing of transitions for a board when you are growing. And so, for instance, I'm setting up a board and we're working locally in Denver, but we have a project that could be scalable to Colorado and then ultimately nationally. And so how do you think about like transitioning and thinking about like where you are now versus where you're going and positioning the board for those transitions?
Well, I think if you've set out in the beginning the expectation that a board transition will occur every 3 years, you don't have to have people leave the board after a 3-year interval, and you can choose any interval you want in terms of the actual term of office for any individual, for any board member. But 3 years is a really common amount of time for people to be on a board, and it can be renewed if you so desire. So I think the transitioning question, especially that you're asking, is something that is handled really well by a package of information which we call an onboarding package. And it's really frequent that people are placed in the role of a board member in a technical situation and have no understanding of what the expectations are of them for performance. So it's one of the reasons that the onboarding package, I believe, to be an essential part of the transitions in board membership, because it gives people at the very beginning an understanding of what is expected of them, gives them a portfolio that is consistent with their skill set, and sets up a standard for performance for later evaluation.
Ron, I will ask, and you talked a little bit about ways to pick boards, but are there some pitfalls or concerns that we should be thinking about?
Yes, there always are, because I have, now that I've traveled through this philanthropic world for 17 years, have some level of concern about many people who enter the nonprofit philanthropic world with the intention of doing good, ostensibly, but in reality have very self-centered reasons for doing it. There's a lot of prestige that goes along with a board position in many organizations, and in some of the ones that we within ClassACT deal with, they're all fantastic organizations, and people like to say that they are part of these philanthropic boards, but they're behind that sometimes not the passion in the belly that we really need to make a board member effective. So what I would say, Marion, is the fire in the belly is what we're looking for, and we have to do it through some reasonable level of due diligence, because it's hard to remove somebody from a board unless you have term limits, and that term has actually come up. And these become some of the most unpleasant experiences in your board life. And for me, I can definitely say that the most unpleasant experiences of my own 17 years have been in trying to get people off the board. They came on with a whole notion that they wanted to support this wonderful, noble philanthropic cause, but really, in truth, had only a much more self-centered motivation for doing it, and really didn't want to be part of the team and didn't want to do the work.
Thank you. Jeffrey List, would you unmute yourself? And then when you are done and the question's answered, then Catherine will have you.
Some organizations have expectations which they convey to prospective directors. Some then go so far as to have a written document describing those expectations, and some go even further and ask each director to sign a document saying that he understands those expectations. I'm wondering what you think the pros and cons of those things.
Well, it's a great question, and it's a great point. I believe in the onboarding package that I have described, and in reality, you should have all of your board members sign off on some of those elements of the package anyway, and one of them being the conflict of interest statement, because the law requires a very careful scrutiny of potential conflicts of interest in board members. So signing off on a conflict of interest statement is really a legal obligation as well. But I like the idea. We have not asked people to sign off on the onboarding package that we create. I demonstrated to you the package that we give out. It's about 10 pages long, and we haven't had them sign because I've never felt that it would be that necessary, because each person that comes on is assigned a mentor, so that they talk with a mentor about the elements in the onboarding package on a one-on-one basis. So I've never felt that you need to sign off on that conversation. So I believe that you should do it. I don't think you have to really quite be that draconian about signing off things. People sometimes get a little bit put off by it. But, you know, on the other hand, every board has its own appetite for evaluation. Every board has its own appetite for work and passion. And there are many good ways of doing things. And the ways that we have done things have evolved over time. And I think the bottom line for me is that I believe it is really helpful to an organization and to an individual to set standards for performance ahead of time and to revisit those standards through a minimal evaluation process.
Thank you, Ron. And this will be the last question. Catherine Macumber, would you unmute yourself?
Yes. So this is kind of actually a pre-board question, which is, what would you say, Ron, would be a determining factor in deciding whether or not to create a nonprofit and the board and all of what happens with that versus keeping a project in, say, a more entrepreneurial approach? Even if
again, it's a really good question. And part of it, I think, really boils down to resources that you have available to you. If you are rich and well-connected, you can do all kinds of stuff without all the machinations of a nonprofit organization. But most of us don't have that kind of luxury of how to do things of the magnitude that a board can do because of the credibility that you develop as a board. Like for us, I can't even for a moment imagine that we could attempt to undertake some of the things that we do in the low income world as individuals and just being sponsored by individual investors, as opposed to working as a nonprofit organization, because as you know, the world is filled with NGOs. And when in the worlds that I function in, NGOs are absolutely everywhere. I like working in the nonprofit sector for many reasons. It gives you a lot of camaraderie with people in the network that you're part of to really function at a high level. And I think that it really suggests to your audience, your donors, the recipients, that you have a high level of sincerity and sustainability. Because when I see that somebody is part of an organization, I think in my head, sustainability. This is a sustainable project here because they aren't going to go away. This is an issue that comes up for us all the time. Are these guys going to go away? Are they going to come in, give us software, train us how to do it, and they're going to be gone next year? And if I had an individual going in to do the same things we do as a team, as part of our organization, I don't think that we could ever convince as many people to participate in the projects as we can. Just simply because an individual is probably a little bit less trustworthy than an organization with stated principles of values and missions.
Great. Thank you so much for that.
And thank you, Ron, for this wonderful 40 minutes. And as you can imagine, we in the ClassACT board are very grateful that Ron is one of our board members, as well as the leader of Kids Care Everywhere. And I suggest you look at our website and learn more about Kids Care Everywhere, because it's an extraordinary organization that we're very proud to partner with. So thank you, Ron. Thank you, all of you nonprofit leaders and thinkers for joining us. And I want to say we of ClassACT wish all who inhabit this troubled world at this time safety, peace, and joy for the holidays and for the new year. So blessings for all of you. Good evening.